Dear friends, we're working hard to share these with you. Please subscribe and like our work. Thank you in advance. If you're ready, let's begin our story. Marcus Reed had been hauling cargo through the outer system for 12 years, and in all that time, the most exciting thing he'd encountered was a particularly stubborn asteroid that had refused to get out of his way. So when his proximity alarm started screaming about a massive object dead ahead, his first thought wasn't alien contact or historical discovery. His first thought was, please don't let this be another insurance claim. The object resolved on his screens as something that definitely wasn't supposed to exist according to any human engineering manual he'd ever read. It was sleek where human ships were angular, graceful where they were utilitarian, and roughly the size of a small city floating in the space between Mars and Jupiter like it owned the neighborhood. Well, that's new, Marcus muttered, cutting his engines and letting his cargo hauler drift closer. The ship, and it was definitely a ship, despite looking like it had been grown rather than built, was dark except for a few faint lights scattered along its hull like dying stars. His salvage scanner chirped helpfully, informing him that the vessel showed no signs of active propulsion, weapon systems, or communication arrays. It also detected one life sign aboard, which was either very good news or very bad news, depending on who that life sign belonged to. Marcus considered his options. He could report the find to the authorities and spend the next 6 months filling out paperwork while bureaucrats decided what to do about humanity's first confirmed alien contact. He could pretend he'd never seen it and continue on his delivery route, leaving someone else to deal with the implications of non-human intelligence in the solar system. Or he could do something spectacularly stupid and investigate personally. Option 3 it is, he said, maneuvering his ship toward what looked like it might be a docking port. Because apparently 13 years of safe, boring cargo runs weren't enough for me. The alien ship's hull was warm to the touch when his magnetic clamps engaged, and he could feel a faint vibration through his boots that suggested the vessel still had some kind of power source active. The airlock cycled with a soft hiss that sounded almost musical, and Marcus found himself breathing atmosphere that tasted faintly of ozone and something that reminded him of ocean breezes. Okay, he said to himself, adjusting his portable scanner and checking his sidearm out of habit, let's go meet the neighbors. The corridor beyond the airlock was lit by strips of soft blue light that seemed to respond to his presence, brightening as he approached and dimming behind him as he passed. The architecture was all curves and flowing lines, as if the ship had been carved from a single piece of stone rather than assembled from metal components. Marcus followed his scanner's readings deeper into the vessel, past chambers filled with equipment he couldn't begin to identify and through passages that branched and rejoined like blood vessels. The life sign was getting stronger, leading him toward what his scanner suggested was the ship's command center. He found her in what was obviously the bridge, though it looked more like a cathedral than any command center he'd ever seen. She was slumped in a chair that seemed to have grown from the floor itself, her head tilted back and her eyes closed. Even unconscious and obviously injured, she radiated a kind of authority that made Marcus feel like he should probably bow or salute or ask permission to breathe her air. She was also definitely not human. The pointed ears were the first giveaway, sweeping back from her head in elegant curves that would have made any fantasy artist weep with envy. Her skin had a faint luminescence that seemed to come from within, and her hair was silver white with streaks of deep purple that definitely hadn't come from any human hair salon. She wore what looked like armor made from the same flowing material as the ship itself, all curves and organic lines that suggested both protection and artistic beauty. "Ma'am," Marcus said quietly, approaching with the careful movements of someone who wasn't entirely sure about alien etiquette. "Are you okay?" Her eyes snapped open, revealing irises that shifted color like oil on water. She focused on him with the intensity of a predator, and Marcus found himself taking an involuntary step backward as she sat up in her chair. "Human," she said, her voice carrying an accent that managed to make English sound like a musical language. "You dare board the flagship of the Astari Empire without permission?" "Sorry," Marcus said automatically, then caught himself. "Actually, no, not sorry. Your ship was drifting dead in space with no active communications. I detected a life sign and came to render assistance." That standard salvage protocol. Salvage protocol. She stood up with fluid grace, and Marcus realized she was tall, easily 6 feet, with the kind of bearing that suggested she was used to looking down on people both literally and figuratively. You consider the flagship of Queen Lyra Thane to be salvage? Queen Lyra Thane, Marcus repeated slowly. Right. And I'm supposed to know who that is because... She stared at him for a long moment, her expression cycling through surprise, indignation, and something that might have been curiosity. You do not know of the Astari Empire? The conquest of the Helio sector? The Battle of Seven Suns? Lady, until about 10 minutes ago, I didn't know there were any aliens in this solar system. The biggest battle I've heard of recently was the fight over mining rights in the asteroid belt, and that was settled with lawyers instead of lasers. Queen Lyra Thane, assuming that was actually her name and title, continued to stare at him with those shifting eyes. What is your species' level of technological development? Well, we can fly between planets, we've got decent computers, and we've almost figured out how to make coffee that doesn't taste like motor oil. Why? Your people have not achieved faster-than-light travel. Not even close. We're still working on getting to the next solar system without everyone dying of old age on the way. She sat back down heavily, wincing as the movement aggravated what Marcus now realized was an injury to her left side. Primitive, she murmured, though not unkindly. No wonder your species has not been contacted. Contacted by who? And while we're on the subject, what are you doing drifting around in human space with a busted ship? The rebels, she said simply, then seemed to catch herself. That is, there was a battle. My forces were betrayed by one of my own generals. The flagship was damaged, and we were forced to retreat into this backwater system. Marcus looked around the cathedral-like bridge, taking in the elegant technology and the obvious signs of recent battle damage. Scorch marks on the walls, flickering displays, and the fact that the queen of the Astari Empire was sitting alone in a crippled ship suggested that retreat might be putting a positive spin on things. So you're stranded, he said. Temporarily inconvenienced, she corrected with the kind of dignity that only royalty could manage while bleeding and stranded in space. Right. Temporarily inconvenienced in a ship that's not going anywhere without major repairs. Marcus consulted his scanner, getting a better picture of the vessel's condition. Your power systems are running at about 15%, you've got hull breaches on 3 decks, and your engine core is showing signs of cascade failure. You can read Astari technology. I can read things are broken in pretty much any language. It's a job skill. Marcus looked at the queen, taking in her obvious injuries and the exhausted set of her shoulders. When's the last time you ate something? I fail to see how that is relevant to. When's the last time you ate something? Marcus repeated more firmly. Perhaps, 2 days ago. Right. And when's the last time you slept? A queen does not. When? She was quiet for a moment. 4 days. Perhaps 5. Marcus nodded and started back toward the airlock. Come on. Where are you going? We're going to my ship, where you're going to eat something that isn't alien royal rations and get some sleep while I figure out how to fix your floating palace. You cannot simply command the queen of the Astari Empire to. Your Majesty, Marcus said, turning back to face her, with all due respect, right now you're not the queen of anything. You're an injured person in a broken ship who needs help. And helping people is something humans are pretty good at, even when those people happen to be alien royalty with attitude problems. Lyra Thane drew herself up to her full height, and for a moment Marcus thought she might actually try to order him around. Then her shoulders sagged slightly, and he saw something flicker in those color-shifting eyes that looked almost like relief. You would help me? She asked quietly. Even knowing nothing of my people or my cause. Ma'am, I've been hauling cargo through space for over a decade. I've helped stranded miners, rescued lost tourists, and once spent 3 days fixing a broken recycling system for a research station whose entire crew had food poisoning. Helping a stranded alien queen is definitely going on my resume, but it's not exactly out of character. She was quiet for a long moment, studying his face with an intensity that made Marcus feel like she was reading his soul. Very well, she said finally. I will accept your assistance. Temporarily. Great. Fair warning though, my ship's not exactly built for royalty. Hope you don't mind sleeping on a fold-out bunk and eating food that comes out of packages. I have endured worse accommodations during military campaigns. Military campaigns, Marcus repeated as they walked toward the airlock. Right. I'm definitely going to need to hear about those. As they transferred to his cargo hauler, Marcus found himself wondering what he'd gotten himself into. 12 hours ago, his biggest concern had been whether he'd make his delivery deadline. Now he was apparently harboring an alien queen fleeing from rebels in what sounded like an interstellar civil war. On the other hand, it was definitely the most interesting thing that had happened to him in years. Marcus's cargo hauler looked exactly like what it was, a working ship built for function over form, with exposed pipes, utilitarian furniture, and the kind of lived-in comfort that came from being someone's home for 12 years. Queen Lyra Thane stood in the main compartment, looking around with the fascination of someone who had never seen anything so aggressively mundane. This is your vessel, she asked, running her fingers along a bulkhead that Marcus had repaired with actual duct tape. Home sweet home. Not exactly a palace, but it gets me where I need to go. Marcus gestured toward the small galley. Kitchen's over there, bunks through that hatch, and the head, bathroom, is behind the blue door. Make yourself comfortable. Comfortable, she repeated, as if the word were foreign to her. You know, relaxed. At ease. Not worrying about rebels or engine failures or whatever other problems alien queens have to deal with. She sat carefully on the edge of his worn couch, her perfect posture making the furniture look shabby by comparison. In 3 centuries of rule, I have never been comfortable. There is always another system to conquer, another threat to neutralize, another challenge to the Empire's authority. Marcus paused in his rummaging through the food storage. 3 centuries. How old are you? By your measurements? Approximately 417 years. Right. Of course you are. Marcus pulled out a package of what the label optimistically called beef stew and started heating it. So you've been conquering star systems for 300 years. That's quite a hobby. It is not a hobby, Lyra Thane said with a flash of her earlier imperious tone. It is necessity. The strong rule, the weak serve. This is the way of the universe. Is it? Marcus brought her the heated meal along with a spoon that had definitely seen better days. Because from where I sit, it looks like the way of the universe is mostly people trying to get by without bothering anyone else too much. She accepted the food with the careful grace of someone who wasn't entirely sure what they were supposed to do with it. You speak of your species as if conquest is not in your nature. Yet surely your people have wars, conflicts over resources and territory. Sure we do. But we also have laws, and negotiations, and compromise. Most of the time, anyway. Marcus settled into his chair, watching her take her first tentative bite of reconstituted stew. What do you think? It is adequate, she said diplomatically. Though somewhat lacking in complexity. That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said about emergency rations. You should see what passes for fine dining on mining stations. You find humor in everything, don't you? It beats finding despair in everything. Life's hard enough without making it harder on yourself. Marcus pulled up a diagnostic display on his tablet, showing the readings from her ship. Speaking of hard, we've got some serious work ahead of us if we're going to get your flagship moving again. Lyra Thane leaned forward to examine the display, her color-shifting eyes analyzing data with the speed of someone accustomed to processing complex information. The quantum matrix is destabilized, the gravitational field generators are offline, and the hyperdrive core is showing cascade resonance failures. Right. In human terms, your engine is broken, your power source is dying, and your faster-than-light drive is about to explode. A crude but accurate assessment. She looked up at him. Do you have the technical knowledge to repair a starry technology? Probably not. But I have something better. Which is 12 years of experience fixing impossible things with inappropriate tools and stubborn determination. Marcus grinned. Plus, your ship's computer systems are still partially functional. With the right interface protocols, I should be able to jury-rig some solutions using human components. You would combine primitive human technology with advanced Astari systems. I've combined stranger things. Once spent a week keeping a fusion reactor running with spare parts from a food processor. Engineering is engineering, Your Majesty. Sometimes the elegant solution isn't the right solution. She was quiet for a moment, studying him with that unsettling intensity. You called me, Your Majesty. Well, yeah. You're a queen, right? Seemed like the polite thing to do. Most beings who address me by title do so out of fear or calculated respect. You do so out of politeness. Is that weird? Extremely. She took another bite of stew, chewing thoughtfully. Tell me about your life, Marcus Reed. What drives a human to spend 12 years alone in the void, hauling cargo between distant worlds? Marcus considered the question. Freedom, mostly. Out here, I'm my own boss. I set my own schedule, choose my own routes, help people who need helping. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work, and nobody tells me what to do. No ruler. No government authority. Well, there are regulations and taxes and all that, but mostly they leave cargo haulers alone as long as we don't cause trouble. The outer system is pretty much governed by common sense and mutual cooperation. Fascinating. Lyra Thane set down her empty bowl, looking thoughtful. In my empire, every aspect of life is regulated, controlled, optimized for maximum efficiency and productivity. Sounds exhausting. It is the burden of leadership. Order must be maintained, resources must be allocated, the weak must be protected from their own poor decisions. Or, Marcus suggested, people could be trusted to make their own decisions and live with the consequences. That is chaos. That's freedom. They looked at each other across the small compartment, two entirely different philosophies of life embodied in a human cargo hauler and an alien queen. Marcus found himself wondering what it would be like to carry the weight of an entire interstellar empire, to be responsible for billions of lives across hundreds of star systems. Lyra Thane, for her part, seemed to be contemplating what it would be like to wake up each morning with no responsibilities beyond keeping your own ship running and your own life moving forward. Marcus Reed, she said finally, may I ask you something? Shoot. Are you happy? The question caught him off guard. Am I happy? I guess so, yeah. Most of the time. Why? I have conquered 73 star systems, commanded fleets of 10,000 ships, ruled over civilizations that span centuries of development. I have never once asked myself if I was happy. Maybe you should start. Perhaps. She stood up with fluid grace, moving to the small viewport that showed the stars beyond. Your repairs will take how long? Couple of days, maybe 3 if your quantum matrix is as fried as it looks. And after that? After that, you go back to being the queen of the Astari Empire, and I go back to hauling cargo. Ships in the night and all that. She was quiet for a long moment, her reflection ghost-like in the viewport glass. When I was young, merely 50 years old, I believed that power was the answer to every problem. Sufficient force, properly applied, could solve any challenge, defeat any enemy, achieve any goal. And now? Now I wonder if perhaps the greatest power is knowing when not to use it. Marcus joined her at the viewport, looking out at the vast expanse of space dotted with distant stars. For what it's worth, Your Majesty, you don't strike me as the typical tyrannical overlord type. You have met many tyrannical overlords. Just the one, actually. But she's eating my emergency rations and asking philosophical questions about happiness, so I'm thinking she might be having some career doubts. Lyra Thane actually smiled at that, an expression that transformed her entire face and made her look less like an untouchable queen and more like someone Marcus could imagine having long conversations with over late-night coffee. I should rest, she said. Tomorrow we begin repairs, and I suspect working with human technology will require all of my patience. Probably. Fair warning, I tend to talk to machinery when it's not cooperating. Don't take it personally if you hear me having arguments with your quantum matrix. I will endeavor to remember that. She paused at the hatch to the sleeping compartment. Marcus Reed? Yeah. Thank you. For the food, for the shelter, for treating me as a person rather than a title. Don't mention it. That's what neighbors do. Neighbors, she repeated softly, as if testing the word. Yes. I believe I would like that. After she'd gone to rest, Marcus sat alone in his main compartment, staring out at the stars and trying to process the fact that he was harboring an alien queen who commanded star fleets and conquered civilizations. Tomorrow he'd start the impossible task of repairing technology he didn't understand with tools that weren't designed for the job. But tonight, for the first time in longer than he could remember, his cargo hauler didn't feel quite so empty. Marcus was elbow-deep in alien circuitry, cursing creatively at a quantum matrix that seemed determined to spite him, when his proximity alarm started screaming. He'd been working for 6 hours straight, with Lyra Thane providing guidance that ranged from helpful technical advice to imperious commentary about human engineering limitations. Multiple contacts, she said, studying the display with the calm of someone who'd been expecting this moment. 7 ships, a starry configuration. They've found me. Friends of yours? Marcus asked, though her expression already gave him the answer. General Kethvar and his rebel fleet. My former military commander, now my most dedicated enemy. She moved to the communication station with fluid precision. They will demand my surrender and the return of what they consider stolen imperial resources. Meaning you? Meaning the advanced technology of the flagship, the strategic intelligence in my neural implants, and yes, my person as well. She looked at him with those color-shifting eyes. Marcus Reed, you should prepare to distance yourself from this situation. Kethvar will not distinguish between willing and unwilling accomplices. Accomplices to what? Fixing your ship. Harboring a war criminal. Marcus paused in his work, a fusion torch still in his hands. Come again. 300 years of conquest, Marcus. Hundreds of worlds brought under imperial rule, billions of beings who never chose to be part of my empire. Her voice was steady, but he could see something breaking behind her eyes. How many died resisting? How many civilizations were erased to make room for a starry expansion? And you're just realizing this now? I am realizing that the justifications I used, order, stability, protection of the weak, may have been convenient lies I told myself to avoid seeing what I truly was. Before Marcus could respond, his communication system crackled to life with a voice that carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Human vessel, this is General Kethvar of the Astari Liberation Front. You are harboring a fugitive wanted for crimes against multiple species. Surrender Queen Lyra Thane immediately, and you will be permitted to depart unharmed. Marcus looked at Lyra Thane, who had gone very still. Liberation Front? That sounds like they're the good guys. Perhaps they are, she said quietly. Kethvar was my most trusted general for over a century. When he turned against me, he cited the same concerns you have raised. The suffering caused by imperial expansion, the rights of conquered peoples, the moral cost of maintaining order through force. So why are you running from him? Because, she said, meeting his gaze directly, I am afraid that he is right, and I am afraid of what rightness will cost. The communication system crackled again. Human, you have 30 seconds to respond before we consider you a hostile combatant. Marcus grabbed the transmitter. This is Captain Marcus Reed of the independent cargo vessel Wanderer. I'm providing humanitarian assistance to a stranded individual. Last I checked, that wasn't a crime in anybody's book. The individual you are assisting is responsible for the deaths of billions of sentient beings across 3 centuries of aggressive expansion. Marcus looked at Lyra Thane, who nodded slowly. He's not wrong, she said. Maybe not, Marcus replied, but I've got a rule about not turning people over to firing squads without a fair hearing. Captain Reed, you do not understand the scope of. General Kethvar, Marcus interrupted, I understand plenty. I understand that your former queen is sitting in my cargo hold questioning every decision she's made for 300 years. I understand that she could have ordered me killed or enslaved when I found her, but instead she's been helping me repair her ship so she can face whatever's coming next. And I understand that sometimes people change, and sometimes giving them the chance to make things right is more important than making them pay for what they did wrong. There was a long silence from the other end of the communication. Marcus, Lyra Thane said softly, you cannot protect me from the consequences of my choices. I'm not trying to protect you from consequences. I'm trying to make sure those consequences include the possibility of redemption. You would risk your life for someone you've known for 3 days. I've risked my life for people I've known for 3 minutes. It's kind of a character flaw. The communication system crackled again, and this time the voice was different, bolder, carrying the weight of authority earned rather than inherited. Lyra Thane, the new voice said. It has been too long. Kethvar. She moved to the transmitter, her bearing shifting back into something resembling royal composure. You look well, old friend. As do you, despite your circumstances. The human is correct, you could have eliminated him when he discovered you. The fact that you chose cooperation over compulsion is noteworthy. I have had time to think, Kethvar. About many things. Have you? And what conclusions have you reached? Lyra Thane was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on something Marcus couldn't see. I have concluded that power without wisdom is tyranny, and wisdom without compassion is merely intellectual brutality. I have concluded that 3 centuries of rule by force have created more problems than they solved. And I believe it is time for the Astari Empire to try a different path. You would abdicate. I would, evolve. Transform the Empire from a collection of conquered territories into a voluntary confederation of allied worlds. Grant independence to those who desire it, and work toward cooperation rather than domination. Marcus found himself holding his breath as he listened to an alien queen voluntarily dismantling 3 centuries of imperial power. You understand, Kethvar said carefully, that many of our people will see such changes as weakness. That the transition period will be chaotic, potentially catastrophic. I understand that change is difficult and dangerous. But I also understand that the alternative is eventual revolution, civil war, and the collapse of everything we have built, good and bad alike. And you believe you can guide such a transformation? No, Lyra Thane said simply. I believe we can guide it together. If you are willing to work with me rather than against me. Another long silence. Marcus could practically feel the weight of history shifting around them as decisions that would affect billions of beings across hundreds of star systems hung in the balance. There would be conditions, Kethvar said finally. Accountability for past actions. Reparations to damaged worlds. A complete restructuring of imperial government. I accept. You accept without negotiation. Without knowing the full scope of what will be required. I accept because the alternative is watching my people tear themselves apart in civil war while everything we have built crumbles around us. She looked at Marcus, and he saw something in her expression that he was beginning to recognize as hope. I have learned recently that sometimes the most powerful thing a ruler can do is admit that they need help. From a human cargo hauler. There was something that might have been amusement in Kethvar's voice. From anyone willing to offer it with honest intentions and a good heart. Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks as he realized both aliens were looking at him. Hey, I just fixed some broken machinery. You two are the ones reshaping galactic civilization. Marcus Reed, Lyra Thane said formally, you have shown me that strength can exist without cruelty, that leadership can be service rather than domination, and that sometimes the most profound changes begin with simple kindness between strangers. And you've shown me that people can change, even when they've been making the same mistakes for centuries, Marcus replied. Seems like a fair trade. General Kethvar, Lyra Thane said into the transmitter, I formally request safe passage to the imperial capital, where I will address the High Council and begin the process of governmental restructuring. Granted, Your Majesty. Though I suspect that title will mean something quite different in the future. I hope so, she said quietly. I sincerely hope so. As the rebel fleet moved into escort formation around the flagship, Marcus found himself wondering what came next. Tomorrow, Lyra Thane would return to her empire to begin the impossible task of transforming conquest into cooperation. And he would return to his cargo runs, his simple life, his comfortable solitude. Except somehow, the idea of comfortable solitude had lost most of its appeal. The Astari imperial capital was nothing like what Marcus had expected, and exactly what he should have anticipated from a civilization that grew their buildings instead of constructing them. Spires of living crystal reached toward alien stars, connected by bridges that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, while gardens of impossible beauty cascaded down the sides of structures that seemed to breathe with their own life. It's beautiful, Marcus said, standing on the observation deck of Lyra Thane's flagship as they approached the orbital city. It is the crown jewel of 3 centuries of expansion, she replied, though there was no pride in her voice. Built with resources extracted from 100 conquered worlds, maintained by the tribute of subjugated peoples. And now? Now it will learn to sustain itself through cooperation rather than exploitation. She turned to face him, and Marcus was struck again by the transformation in her bearing over the past weeks. The imperious queen had been replaced by someone who carried authority lightly, like a tool rather than a weapon. Marcus Reed, I must ask something of you. You want me to stick around for the political revolution. I want you to consider remaining as an advisor during the transition period. Your perspective, that of someone outside our culture, someone who sees solutions we cannot imagine, would be invaluable. Marcus looked out at the impossible city, at the alien vessels moving in patterns that suggested millennia of carefully orchestrated traffic control, at the scope of a civilization that spans star systems. I don't know anything about running an empire. No, but you know about treating people with dignity, about finding common ground between different perspectives, about solving impossible problems with inadequate resources. These are precisely the skills we will need. And what about your people? How are they going to react to a human telling them how to run their government? They are going to react with suspicion, resentment, and considerable resistance to change, Lyra Thane said honestly. Which is why we will need someone who can navigate those reactions with humor and patience and a kind of stubborn optimism that convinces people to try impossible things. The flagship's communication system announced their arrival with a harmonious tone that seemed to resonate through the ship's living hull. Marcus could see crowds gathering on the capital's observation platforms, could sense the tension that came with momentous change hanging in the alien air. There's something else, Lyra Thane said quietly. Yeah. I don't want to do this alone. She looked at him with those color-shifting eyes, and Marcus saw vulnerability there that had nothing to do with politics or revolution. For 3 centuries, I ruled from isolation, made decisions in solitude, carried the weight of empire without anyone to share the burden. And then you showed me what it was like to have someone simply present. Someone who saw me as a person rather than a title. Lyra Thane. I know it is selfish. I know you have your own life, your own freedom, your own path through the stars. But I also know that what has grown between us is too precious to abandon for the sake of duty or convention. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching the capital city rotate slowly beneath them. 3 weeks ago, his greatest concern had been a delivery deadline. Now he was being offered the chance to help reshape galactic civilization alongside a woman who had somehow become the most important person in his universe. You know, he said finally, I've been thinking about retirement anyway. 12 years of cargo hauling is probably enough for anyone. And I've always wanted to see what the universe looks like from somewhere other than a cargo ship cockpit. She smiled, the expression lighting up her entire face. Is that a yes? That's a yes, Your Majesty. Though I should warn you, I have no idea how to be a political advisor. And I have no idea how to be a benevolent ruler. We'll figure it out together. The landing bay that received them was filled with beings Marcus had never imagined, not just Astari, but representatives from dozens of species that had been part of the Empire. Some watched with obvious hostility, others with curiosity, still others with the careful neutrality of people waiting to see which way the wind would blow. General Kethvar met them at the boarding ramp, his expression unreadable. Your Majesty, he said formally. The High Council awaits your address. Thank you, General. Before we proceed, I would like to introduce my advisor, Captain Marcus Reed of Earth. The human who convinced you to abandon 3 centuries of imperial policy. The human who reminded me that power without compassion is tyranny, and that sometimes the strongest thing a leader can do is admit they need help. Kethvar studied Marcus with the intensity of someone trying to gauge a potential ally or enemy. Captain Reed, you understand that what you are proposing, what you have convinced our queen to propose, will be extraordinarily difficult to implement. General, I once kept a mining station running for 6 months with spare parts from a children's toy factory. Difficult doesn't scare me. Impossible just takes a little longer. Something that might have been respect flickered in the general's eyes. Very well. Let us see if human optimism can survive Astari politics. The High Council chamber was even more impressive than the capital city, a vast amphitheater that seemed to have been grown from a single crystal, with representatives from hundreds of worlds arranged in ascending tiers that disappeared into architectural shadows. The murmur of dozens of languages created a sound like distant ocean waves. Counselors of the Astari Empire, Lyra Thane began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics, I come before you to propose a transformation that will touch every aspect of our civilization. You come before us as a fugitive, interrupted a voice from the upper tiers. A failed ruler whose policies have led to civil war and rebellion. I come before you as someone who has learned that the methods we have used to build our empire are no longer sustainable, Lyra Thane replied calmly. And I propose that we choose evolution over extinction. The Astari imperial capital was nothing like what Marcus had expected, and exactly what he should have anticipated from a civilization that grew their buildings instead of constructing them. Spires of living crystal reached toward alien stars, connected by bridges that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, while gardens of impossible beauty cascaded down the sides of structures that seemed to breathe with their own life. It's beautiful, Marcus said, standing on the observation deck of Lyra Thane's flagship as they approached the orbital city. It is the crown jewel of 3 centuries of expansion, she replied, though there was no pride in her voice. Built with resources extracted from 100 conquered worlds, maintained by the tribute of subjugated peoples. And now it will learn to sustain itself through cooperation rather than exploitation. She turned to face him, and Marcus was struck again by the transformation in her bearing over the past weeks. The imperious queen had been replaced by someone who carried authority lightly, like a tool rather than a weapon. Marcus Reed, I must ask something of you. You want me to stick around for the political revolution. I want you to consider remaining as an advisor during the transition period. Your perspective, that of someone outside our culture, someone who sees solutions we cannot imagine, would be invaluable. Marcus looked out at the impossible city, at the alien vessels moving in patterns that suggested millennia of carefully orchestrated traffic control, at the scope of a civilization that spans star systems. I don't know anything about running an empire. No, but you know about treating people with dignity, about finding common ground between different perspectives, about solving impossible problems with inadequate resources. These are precisely the skills we will need. And what about your people? How are they going to react to a human telling them how to run their government? They are going to react with suspicion, resentment, and considerable resistance to change, Lyra Thane said honestly. Which is why we will need someone who can navigate those reactions with humor and patience and a kind of stubborn optimism that convinces people to try impossible things. The flagship's communication system announced their arrival with a harmonious tone that seemed to resonate through the ship's living hull. Marcus could see crowds gathering on the capital's observation platforms, could sense the tension that came with momentous change hanging in the alien air. "There's something else," Lyra Thane said quietly. "Yeah. I don't want to do this alone." She looked at him with those color-shifting eyes, and Marcus saw vulnerability there that had nothing to do with politics or revolution. "For 3 centuries, I ruled from isolation, made decisions in solitude, carried the weight of empire without anyone to share the burden. And then you showed me what it was like to have someone simply present. Someone who saw me as a person rather than a title. Lyra Thane. I know it is selfish. I know you have your own life, your own freedom, your own path through the stars. But I also know that what has grown between us is too precious to abandon for the sake of duty or convention." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching the capital city rotate slowly beneath them. 3 weeks ago, his greatest concern had been a delivery deadline. Now he was being offered the chance to help reshape galactic civilization alongside a woman who had somehow become the most important person in his universe. "You know," he said finally, "I've been thinking about retirement anyway. 12 years of cargo hauling is probably enough for anyone. And I've always wanted to see what the universe looks like from somewhere other than a cargo ship cockpit." She smiled, the expression lighting up her entire face. "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes, Your Majesty. Though I should warn you, I have no idea how to be a political advisor. And I have no idea how to be a benevolent ruler. We'll figure it out together." The landing bay that received them was filled with beings Marcus had never imagined, not just Astari, but representatives from dozens of species that had been part of the Empire. Some watched with obvious hostility, others with curiosity, still others with the careful neutrality of people waiting to see which way the wind would blow. General Kethvar met them at the boarding ramp, his expression unreadable. "Your Majesty," he said formally. "The High Council awaits your address." "Thank you, General. Before we proceed, I would like to introduce my advisor, Captain Marcus Reed of Earth. The human who convinced you to abandon 3 centuries of imperial policy. The human who reminded me that power without compassion is tyranny, and that sometimes the strongest thing a leader can do is admit they need help." Kethvar studied Marcus with the intensity of someone trying to gauge a potential ally or enemy. "Captain Reed, you understand that what you are proposing, what you have convinced our queen to propose, will be extraordinarily difficult to implement. General, I once kept a mining station running for 6 months with spare parts from a children's toy factory. Difficult doesn't scare me. Impossible just takes a little longer." Something that might have been respect flickered in the general's eyes. "Very well. Let us see if human optimism can survive Astari politics." The High Council chamber was even more impressive than the capital city,